Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As the director of the Institute for Religion and Peace, representative of the Catholic Military Pastoral of Austria, I welcome you all here this evening to our second event in our cooperation with the Friede Institut für Dialog and the Journalists and Writers Foundation from Istanbul. This evening's topic is a very interesting, but also a, let's say, rather hot one. It's the Armenian and Kurdish experiences from First World War to contemporary Turkey. I'm very grateful that our speakers have come here to introduce us to that, as I said, actual, delicate topic. I want to welcome in particular Mr. Hüseyin Hurmali, Vice President of the Journalists and Writers Foundation in Istanbul, who has come here, and he will speak after me. And I also greet our speakers on the podium, Mr. Fatih Ceran from the Journalists and Writers Foundation, in a very special manner, Mr. Erdi Öztürk from the University of Barcelona, who has come here on short notice to substitute for our speaker who could not come. Thank you very much, sir, that you have come here at so short notice. And then Mr. Seref Kavak from the Keele University in the United Kingdom. This conference will be held in English language. It is also possible to make questions in German. Es ist also durchaus möglich, Fragen auch auf Deutsch zu stellen. Es gibt eine Übersetzung. I'm looking forward to this evening. And now, please, Mr. Hurmali, sir, will you come to deliver your speech? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Freistetter, for this very warm welcome. Honorary participants, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a special pleasure for me to welcome you at this event entitled From First World War to Contemporary Turkey, Armenian and Turkish Experiences, in the framework of the series of events 1914 Peace 2014. As you know, 1914 Peace 2014 is a series of events jointly organized by Institute für Religion und Frieden of the Catholic Military Diocese of the Republic of Austria, by Friede Institut für Dialog, by Forum für Westreligionen, and our foundation. Inspired by Mr. Fethullah Gülen, the honorary president of our foundation, we are aware of the fact that the ignorance, poverty, and internal conflicts are the most serious problems for humankind, and peaceful coexistence is only possible through human element. And to overcome all these issues and for a sustainable peace, dialogue at all levels of society seems to be the only way. Our foundation has gained the general consultative status at the UN Economic and Social Council in July 2012. We are the first and the only institution to acquire this status in Turkey with respect to our international projects, which have had impact all over the world. And currently, the foundation orchestrates 6 platforms under its umbrella, and each platform has a special focus related to peace building. Through our projects and activities, we promote dialogue, tolerance and mutual acceptance, human rights, and freedoms like freedom of faith and conscience, freedom of thought and expression, equal opportunity, and the rule of law, all the essentials of peaceful coexistence. The purpose of our cooperation is the belief that we can learn from the past mistakes, and we intend to shed light on the historical background and highlight the consequences of this global catastrophe. As the peoples of the world, we have been through many destructive events and survived. Yet it takes serious pondering to learn our lessons. In this series, the issues will be discussed multilaterally in search of a consensus about the calamities of the war. And in my opinion, this is a humble effort to prevent the great catastrophe of history from repeating themselves. In this regard, we want to increase the prospect for a peaceful coexistence which will serve us all, and because just saying no to war does not bring the peace in our world, which has become smaller and in which relations have become closer, and dialogue is very essential for peace. Indeed, the Armenian and Kurdish issues in Turkey are topics which are not easy to discuss because they are very painful. Nevertheless, the organizers want to provide a platform for the discussion of these questions because we are aware of the fact that without speaking about them, we will never find a solution for these problems. We all have to learn our lessons. We all have to learn to accept different opinions about issues which are delicate and untouchable, and we have to learn how to live together in peaceful coexistence. To say it with the words of Mr. Gülen, quote, "The peace of this global village lies in respecting all differences, considering these differences to be part of our nature, and in ensuring that people appreciate these differences. Otherwise, it's unavoidable that the world will devour itself in a web of conflicts, disputes, fights, and the bloodiest of wars," end of quote. And before ending my speech, I would like to briefly mention one of the upcoming global events of the Foundation, Istanbul Summit. Istanbul Summit is an international civil society organization summit which aims to gather prominent figures from every quarter of the international committee with a new topic each year. And the first summit, entitled Women's Perspective on UN Post-2015 Development Agenda, will be held in Istanbul on 31st of May and 1st of July 2014. And as the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals quickly approaches, this summit specifically aims to highlight women's perspectives, experiences, and insights as vital inputs for the United Nations' new development goals. At this point, a very special word of thanks goes to our partner, Dr. Freistetter and Dr. Büste, for their cooperation. I would also like to express my gratitude to the team of 3D for involving us in this project. And I welcome you all again, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Tonight we are going to be talking about Turkey, basically, from First World War to contemporary Turkey. We'll actually take it from earlier, from the Ottoman experiences, and I'm going to be the first one to speak. My speech is about the transformation from an imperial society, from the Ottoman Empire to Turkish Republic. We'll be comparing two contexts, and then the second one will be Erdi. He came from Spain, and the third one is going to be Seref. Erdi is going to be talking about the Armenian-Turkish relationships, possible and alternative approaches, and Seref is going to be talking about Turkey-fication, reflections on and from pro-Kurdish politics. And each is going to speak for 20 minutes. I hope you're not going to exceed that, but I would beg your tolerance if we do. Okay. So, this transformation matters because we are still having the aftershocks of this transformation from the Ottoman imperial context to Turkish nation-state context. And before even getting started, I'd like to mention that the change or the transformation did not take or did not proceed on a linear, progressive line. We would have ups and downs. But knowing about the Ottoman Empire matters because we can trace the lines of change and the lines of continuity from the Ottoman to Turkish context. And basically, the change would represent modernity and modernization. and the continuity would represent tradition in our context. Is the voice too high? Is it good? Okay.
It's too high. So
A little too high, right?
at least for me, I can hear you better if it is not.
It is better now. Okay. Tradition and modernity coexists in Turkey, not always in perfect harmony, basically. Turkey inherited a lot of challenges and opportunities from the Ottoman Empire. And we would see that there's going to be two lines of change from the Ottoman to Turkish context. The first one would be homogenization, and the second one would be secularization. But about the Ottoman context, if I have to summarize the Ottoman socio-political life with one word, I would say multiculturalism. Because it's very central in the Ottoman context. There were 60 ethnic and linguistic groups in the Ottoman Empire, and by today's map, there were 38 states once were in the Ottoman territories, be it partly or wholly. It was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic, and multi-climatic empire, actually. And the Ottoman Empire, in political terms, the Ottoman administration lacked a political ideology. This is, I believe, important to understand the flexibility in the Ottoman political thinking. And this lack of political ideology would contribute a lot to the long life of the Ottoman Empire. Just to give you a telling example about the inclusiveness and lack of ideology, one telling example I will give. It took place in 1492, in the very year that the New World was discovered, actually. It was the year when the Spanish king, Ferdinand II, was pushing the Jews and a small number of Muslims in Spain to convert. And they were literally being driven to sea as well. The Ottoman Sultan of the time sent his fleet all the way to Spain in 1492, and some historians say transported 150,000 Jews to the Ottoman lands because there was no Jewish state to shelter them. And the Ottoman Sultan said, famously stated after this, how can you call Ferdinand of Spain a wise man that he just made his country poorer and made us richer? There was a lot of confidence in the socio-political system of the empire. I'll come to that. The socio-political system of the Ottoman Empire was called the nation system. The nations were, in the Ottoman system, were defined around religious lines, not on the ethnic understanding. Nationhood, in the ethnic term, is a very recent term, actually, right? It's like 19th century's concept. And the large communities in the Ottoman Empire, like the Greek, the Armenian, for example, the Jew, they were considered as the nations. So the Ottoman system was more like a community system, large groups living side by side. And religious leaders were vested with political authority as well. The Greek patriarch, the Armenian patriarch, or Jewish rabbis, they were vested with a lot of political power as well. But of course, the Sultan was more like an overarching authority. They all had to be loyal to the monarch, basically. In terms of legal system, the Ottoman Empire again reflects a kind of multitude. There were three sources of law. There was the Sharia. Sharia was more like limiting the power or the exercise of power of monarch, basically. So Sharia had very positive connotations in the Ottoman context, on the contrary of the popular sense of the word today, because basically it was limiting the monarch. The second source of legal code was secular. The Ottoman authorities were making secular laws from early 15th century onwards. And the third one was the legal codes of the other cultures and religions. So there was a huge amount of flexibility. So Sharia basically coexisted with the secular and other religious codes. The 16th and 17th centuries of the empire is called the classic age of the Ottoman Empire, where the Ottomans had an overwhelming self-confidence that for quite some centuries they called the state as the great state. That was the official name of the state, actually. The Ottomanness would be emphasized in the last century of the empire. And another name used for the state was the eternal state, which looks like a pre-modern and early understanding of the end of history understanding, referring to Fukuyama. Three big events took place in the West: the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. They would all have significant and transforming influences on the Ottoman Empire. Industrial Revolution would hit the empire in economic terms mostly, and Enlightenment would hit the empire, would transform it on intellectual terms, and the French Revolution would hit the empire on political terms. After the French Revolution, nationalism would rise, and the nations in the Balkans and the Eastern Europe would seek independence. The first one to gain independence would be the Greek, 1820s. Serbs, Romanians, Bulgarians, Albanians would just follow them. And nationalism would hit the empire from the east after a century. The first Arab revolt would come in 1916. The Ottoman elite, which was mostly the bureaucrat and a rising intelligentsia in the last century. The 19th century is known as the longest century of the empire in the Ottoman history. And there was a lot of intellectual dynamism, actually. In cultural terms, there were two schools of thought: those who wanted to westernize and those who tended to be more conservative on cultural terms. And in terms of political thinking, there were three schools of thought. The first one was Ottomanism, which would emphasize surviving as an empire, but it would lose momentum in a short while, and it would be replaced by Islamism, because especially after the Ottomans lost the Eastern Europe and the Balkans, the empire would turn into a Muslim empire, actually, mostly. So let's stick together as Muslims. So a new ideology for that would be the Islamism. And Islamism would lose momentum in a short while too, because the empire was too big to be ruled from a weak capital, Istanbul, back in the time. And the third school of thought, nationalism, would be the winning party out of the three, as the Turkish Republic would be founded as a nation state on a significantly nationalistic discourse. Actually, I'm just trying to be useful to my friends here, that I'm just trying to lay the grounds or try to show the context in which they will talk about the Armenian and the Kurdish experiences, which may be said the most painful experiences that we had in the recent history. To understand the social psychology in Turkey, we must remember that from the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, the Ottomans had been in a continuous retreat. In our history, this is called as retreat to Anatolia. And this retreat would peak with the First World War, and after the war, as you know, the last 4 dynasties of Europe were lost. Habsburgs here, Hohenzollerns, the Romanovs in Russia, and the Ottomans. So the last remaining dynasties were gone. So that's a fast transformation into nation state. The word transformation took different meanings in the Ottoman and Turkish context. In the Ottoman context, the transformation mostly took place through Islamization. Even the most reformers of the Ottoman context, they were trying to Islamize the change to justify it, basically. But the Republican context would be different. In the overwhelming or the dominant understanding in the Republican era would be a whole civilizational transformation. And the nature of change was top-down and authoritarian in most cases, with varying degrees of authoritarianism, which actually is the case. In most cases, this has been the case outside the Western Europe. The change was pushed by the elite because social dynamics were lacking. This was the case in Turkey as well. If I have to summarize the change from the Ottoman to Turkish context, I would say a secular nation building, basically. And there are 2 lines of change. The homogenization or Turkey-fication, in a way, and the second line of change, which would be more influential in positive and negative ways, secularization. So, Turkishness would be defined on a mix of 2 major understandings. In the Turkish context, in the Republican context, Turkishness would both have ethnic and civic connotations. I mean, the difference exists in the literature, actually. The real life would have both. And secularism or secularization would be very important and very transforming. Turkey adopted a secularism which would resemble the French school of secularism, which is known as assertive, Jacobin from time to time, and there has always been traces of authoritarianism. The change, again, was pushed by the elite, enforced by the elite. And it would be significantly radical in terms of being non-tolerant vis-a-vis religious visibility in the public sphere. That in 1923, after the First World War, Turkish Republic was founded as a nation state. And in the first constitution of this nation state, which is made in 1924, it states that the official religion of Republic of Turkey is Islam. Just in 4 years, they would take it out from the constitution. In 1928, we just took it out. And in 1937, we adopted secularism in our constitution. 11 years before the French did, actually. And there are differences in terms of implementing the change, actually, that French voted for the change, for example. They decided after an election that the state would be secular. And when we adopted secularism in 1937, we had a single-party rule in Turkey. So it was significantly more authoritarian than the French. And the French society was already a secularized society. We weren't that much secular. And from 1923 to 1950, we had a single-party system. the program of that party was basically a modernization which is formed around this radical understanding of secularism. We didn't join the Second World War. In 1950, we adopted multi-party system, and the opposition won the first election they joined. They won the second, they won the third. And it was their third term. The old guard, the old establishment reacted, and they reacted harshly. There came the first military coup of modern Turkish history. In 1960, military intervened and they hanged the prime minister and 2 ministers of his cabinet. And in 1971, there would come the second military coup. In 1980, the third and the most destructive military coup took place. 70s are very important for Turkey. And in 1997, there came the fourth and last successful military coup. And actually, after 1980s, Turkey started democratizing. Turkey was pretty much an isolated country. There was an understanding that we were surrounded by the enemies. Yeah, I should keep it down. Okay. Better now? Yes. Okay. There was an understanding that we were surrounded by, it's really better now, by the enemies from 4 sides. They used to teach us at school, I'm 36, I'm not that old, I remember this indoctrination was still there. When they used to teach us that the only friend of a Turk is another Turk, for example. Just trying to show you the amount of isolation. And they used to teach us, again, Turkey was surrounded by seas from 3 sides and by enemies from 4. So we had isolated ourselves from our surroundings. And this democratization slowed down in 90s. And they would accelerate at the beginning of 2000s. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have a straight line of progress, basically, in terms of democratization. We have ups and downs. And after 1997 coup, there were 2 more coup attempts in 2004 and 2009. And both failed. Basically, there was, socioeconomically, there was a new Turkey, even if not politically. There was a new Turkey, and the junta failed to realize the change in Turkey, basically. We had a much bigger private sector, which tends to be self-regulating, right? We have a growing sense of civil society, and we had NGOs, actually, which the Journalists and Writers Foundation is a major one in Turkey. And in 2002, the Justice and Development Party came to power with, thank you, it's okay, with promises on democratization, basically. And democratization was very appealing to the masses in Turkey. But then again, recently we are having downs in terms of democratization. As I mentioned, it's not a straight line. We're not always progressing. There are 2 theories. There are 2 theories trying to explain the internal contradictions of issues, internal contradictions of AK Party, Justice and Development Party, current government in Turkey. The first theory says that AK Party came to power in 2002, but they just evolved from a political Islamist party. So they were trying to justify themselves with the efforts of democratization. So they were trying to settle in the political system, and they were just trying to clear the way because there was a lot of resistance from the bureaucracy of the country, both military and judiciary. And once they realized that they were strong enough. They established their civilian authority. They started a kind of rule which was authoritarian, which is still authoritarian and arbitrary. Just yesterday, we shut down the Twitter, and our Prime Minister threatened to shut down YouTube and Facebook as well. Another theory says that AK Party was never democratizing. I mean, they never committed intellectual force behind democratization. They were doing both at the same time. So we are looking at a multiple discourse, actually, in the case of AK Party. On some issues, they are really a force of democratization, but on some issues we see a lot of authoritarian tendencies. And this is basically explained by an extreme understanding of pragmatism in terms of policy making, which allows multiple discourses. Okay, I'm coming to the last 5 minutes. Just last year, Istanbul chief of AK Party declared that they parted ways with liberals. This was an alarming signal coming from AK Party, actually, because the liberals were providing some kind of intellectual framework for AK Party, and without them, we didn't know what they would evolve into. And unfortunately, they evolved into an authoritarian understanding of rule, basically. And our Prime Minister started calling people with names. For example, whoever consumes alcohol, he called them drunkards and alcoholics. And he publicly stated that, he said, of course we would raise religious and pious generations. A state intervention into religious affairs is a dangerous thing, right? Should be decided in a multiple sense and on a civic sphere. And instead of paving the way for civic groups to teach Islam, for example, he promoted Islamic schools ruled and regulated by the state. So this is, in a way, our understanding of secularism. It has never been a separation of state and religion. It was more like a utilitarian employment of religion in terms of public administration. And so our Prime Minister was giving, after 2011, he was giving signals of conservatism, basically, which he didn't promise to the masses who voted for him. And there came the Gezi Park events. You probably followed them on media the last summer, right? Which started in very peaceful ways, and some people, actually some social scientists, called it as the beginning of postmodernism in Turkey. Very different people from very different schools of thought came together in a peaceful protest, but we saw a harsh, it's my watch, I think. It's reminding me my time is up. We saw a harsh police reaction, which would radicalize the protest, and the protest would later be hijacked by the extremist groups. So the second incident was Gezi Park. During the Gezi Park issue, it became public that the current government in Turkey had a divided mindset. Because in the discourse, there was always us and them. And them, they were, of course, negative. And there came December 17, a huge corruption scandal broke out in the country, which claimed the positions of 4 ministers in the cabinet. They had to resign later. From the very beginning, and without letting the judiciary take its course, do its job, our Prime Minister started dehumanizing those who, he said, was behind the investigations. In every country, there is almost always, it's like an empirical rule, that there is corruption, right? But in our case of corruption, there were three differences. The first one, the volume, the scale of corruption was too big. We are talking about billions of dollars of corruption. And the second one was allegedly, actually these are all allegations I'm speaking now because there was no judicial process, because our Prime Minister unfortunately reassigned all three prosecutors who were responsible for the case. Anyway, the second difference of our corruption is that they built a system, allegedly, a system out of it. What percentage goes to whom is made clear. And the third one is they're seeking for some kind of cultural or religious justification to what's being done, that we are all going to do this for philanthropic purposes. That's not very easy to believe, actually. And our Prime Minister started dehumanizing the largest civic movement of the country, the Hizmet movement, the Gülen movement, also known as. Hizmet movement is a faith-inspired civic movement. Yeah, it's a faith-inspired civic movement dedicated to peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence is the organizing concept, the organizing theme in Hizmet. And in terms of religion, I said religiously inspired, right? In terms of religion, there is now a significant diversity. It's not just Muslims. The movement is active in more than 160 countries. It's one of the most global movements, if not the most. It's active in Shintoist Japan, in Catholic Austria, in Muslim Turkey, and secular France, and it teaches local culture, basically. So in terms of inspiration, there is a multitude in Hizmet now, that from very different religious backgrounds, people give a hand to what's being done. So, why our Prime Minister targeted Turkey? First of all, why targeting Hizmet? Why dehumanizing Hizmet, basically? It makes sense. There's a rationality behind this, because Hizmet was criticizing the government on 5 issues. The first one was we were slowing down in our democratization. So the second one is the promotion of rights and freedoms. The promotion of rights and freedoms, it was off the agenda, basically. The third one was sidelining the army. The current government has been extremely successful on that, and we appreciate that a lot. And EU access membership, unfortunately, it's off the Turkish agenda now. It's just a face value that we just talk about it, but there's no commitment, there's no political commitment behind this. And Hizmet movement insists on the reforms to move on in terms of EU access, because basically we obviously need an external leverage to establish our democracy in a consolidated way. So EU membership would provide this external leverage. So we wanted EU reforms to move on, but they're not really moving on, because our leaders are talking about being a member of Shanghai 5, for example, which we find a dangerous trend, because in terms of democracy, in terms of rights and freedoms, I don't think we have much to learn from Shanghai 5. And the fifth line that Hizmet supported AK Party was a new and civilian constitution, which would be formed around individual rights and freedoms, basically. We are still being run by a military constitution, which is state-centric and control-oriented, unfortunately. So, in Turkey, we are going through difficult times. But I believe I'm very optimistic still, because social forces are at work. Peaceful dynamics are at work. So I believe we're going to be a more democratic country, and we would emphasize the individual rights and freedoms better. Thank you very much.
Would you like to come up here?
By the way, thank you very much for this quite nice Turkish political life summary. And thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and I'm expressing my gratitude towards the organization board. It's quite hard for me to pronounce all that German words. I'm just generalize it, I'm sorry. Before starting my discussion, basically my tiny and explanatory speech, I want to express an important point. As most of you know, and the sir mentioned about that, I'm not the main owner of this chair. Literally, Mr. Cemal Uşak, who is one of the important intellectuals of Turkey, and also deputy chair of the Journalists and the Writers Foundation, and basically and honestly, my exterior friend is the main owner of this chair. But unfortunately, he's quite ill right now, and so he can't be here, and I believe he will quickly recover himself and continue to share his important comments with us. In this respect, forgive me if I'll do any mistakes, any kind of mistakes, because I have quite limited time to prepare this speech, and partially partially I'll speak and read. Probably during the discussion we can highlight some points. Yes, from my point of view, today we are trying to debate some subjects which are commonly used, quote-unquote, because of their problematic structure and the backgrounds. One of these is the Armenian question. At this point, please let me to prefer this. I'll prefer to use Armenian question generally, not about this speech, because this identification includes less bias to compare the others. From this point of view, precisely without any doubts, it is very possible to say that Armenian question is one of the problematic and grave subjects for Republic of Turkey's both inside and outside political and the social environment. In other words, Armenian question is a kind of hot potato. It's very hard to touch it, and which is both painful and difficult to touch for Turkey and the Turkish citizens. Therefore, Armenian question is an issue which has an eclectic structure. It's a purely combination of normative and practical deep questions, and also different academic disciplines and the subfields such as international relations, political science, and sociology, history, psychology, human rights, nationalism, religion studies, and anthropology. Let me move a little bit back. Armenian question, as I mentioned, it's a purely combination between some academic areas and the sub-areas. Addition to that tied up, currently this issue is directly related with international social political marketing, religion representation, and using the methodology of both soft power, hard power, and the lobby issue. And although this issue includes deep multi-site deprivations, it should be noted that it's also a kind of a political playing card for, although it is also a kind of political playing card for cosmopolitan countries. But precisely from my point of view, it is directly related with human and the life. And in this respect, it seems quite impossible to talk all the points of this purely issue that such a kind of tiny speech. So I plan to express, just clarify the issue and try to create a future perspective, because the past is already past, but the future is quite important for all of us, for our next generation, for our child. So let me summarize the issue and then draw all together a future perspective about it. Although, according to many scholars, Armenian written history starts nearly 6th century BC as a geographically and linguistically linguistically and identificationally, but we can just see the first relations between Turks and Armenians. This is the last. No, please. Yeah, we can just see the first relation between Turks and Armenians during the late Selçuklu period. It's also possible to reach an argument from both academic researchers and written and oral memories, which is that Armenians doesn't have totally successful history concerning establishing state with a fulfilled institutes, but which I mean the state contemporary meaning of state. But however, that background, they were starting to place an important and critical positions during the Ottoman Empire period into the palace and bureaucracy. Additional to that, they were always free about living their religions. For example, for instance, in this context, Ottoman authorities were quote-unquote led to establish Armenians' religion centers since 1324. Therefore, they had the rights like other minorities inside the Ottoman Empire concerning law, trade, and lifespan. All in all, inevitably and then normally, from my point of view, Armenians affected during the late Ottoman Empire period world nationalistic ideas and movements. In this respect, I prefer to shift a little bit and at the same time and to understand the Armenian question and clarify our memories about the First World War, as you mentioned before. Here, I think it can be possible to summarize the First World War like that was a disaster of unprecedented proportions. At least 16 million people lost their lives and another 20 million people were wounded. Ottoman, as you know, Austria and Hungary and Russian empires collapsed, boundaries changed dramatically and large-scale human migrations occurred. Even before the war, the Ottoman Empire had begun to decline continuously as a result of penetration of European colonialism, nationalism, and corresponding welfare. The Russian expansionism and nationalist movements try to start the Ottoman structure. On this period, nearly 4.5 million Ottoman Muslims perished from their homelands. And moreover, around 5 million Ottoman citizens were driven away from their main homes in the Balkans and the Caucasus, and during the periods of the empire's dissertations and found shelter in Anatolia and Istanbul. Armenians, as all the other people that made up the empire, also suffered as commonly like the other minorities because of this process. They lost of many innocent lives, and departure from homelands was a common fate. Even today, traumatic consequences of the 1915 events continue to upset Turks and Armenians, unfortunately, completing and until now irresponsible narratives on the 15th events, nibble to mutual empathy and self-critical assessment that is need the reconciliation. What is required is to try to examine objectively how this tragedy happened and reveal its true historical concepts, including the dynamics of cause and effects and the history. From this point, second half of the 19th century onwards, Russia and Entente powers aimed to weaken the Ottoman Empire and so supported, this is really normal and rational again, Armenian activists and revolts. Consequently, significant numbers of Armenians armed joined force with the invading Russian army to create ethnically homogeneous Armenian homeland. From my point of view, it's their natural right to create a state. In response, in 1950, the Ottoman government ordered that the Armenian population residing in or near the war zone should be relocated to the southern Ottoman territories, away from the supply roads and army transport lines on the way of advancing Russian army. Some Armenians living away from the front, who were nevertheless reported and suspected of being involved in the collaboration, were also included in compulsory transfer. Of course, in here, we should think about Ottoman government's raison d'etre, which is controlled by the last Ottoman political party, quote-unquote political party, İttihat and Terakki, which is under the idea of nationalism, which Fatih mentioned before me, Turkishness. While the Ottoman government clearly planned that those who had to be moved should be cared for, protect, and feed, most of the Armenians suffered immensely. Wartime conditions and the local groups seeking, there are not just Armenians and Turks. It was a curly situation during the wartime. And generally lawlessness of the collapsing state apparatus all combined to produce a painful tragedy that was behind any contingency expectation. There were also commonly unruled, I think it's an important point for the historical evidence, there were also some unruly Ottoman officials who committed offenses against Armenian convoys. Yet historical documents prove that the Ottoman government not only did not intend these outrages to take place, but that on the contrary, it prosecutes to the perpetrations, officials and the other civilians who disobeyed this rule, government to carry out the relocation in an orderly and secure way wherein those found guilty were sentenced to the capital punishment by the government in 1916, long before the end of the First World War. Despite the tragedy of 1915, the wars between Turks and Armenians armed between almost 1918 and 1920, relations between two states continued without any significant problems until 1960s. That is coming from the world total condition. However, the dynamics of Cold World War politics exploited bitter memories and grievances of Armenian side and the Turkish side, which was normal like the late Ottoman Empire period nationalist movement. But so painful for all the Turks and all the Armenians, I'm sure about that, to remember the quote-unquote terrorism to get attended the world public. Over 30 Turkish diplomats and their relatives were killed after 1975, not because of the Armenian people, just because of the Armenian secret army for liberalization and Armenization. During this period, the Armenian view and the genocide thesis start to be widely disseminated, at times using forged documents and photographs. Significant part of the Armenian literature is sought upon a highlight questionable methodology for explaining population figures. But in fact, it's also my view, and it's a common view, numbers are not primarily the issue. Even the small numbers of innocent deaths is a tragic. Nor does the death of the millions of Ottoman Muslims in the same area, so often ignored in Western and Eastern history, but insisting on genocide as the only way to describe Armenian experience while ignoring Turkish losses.
Excuse me, can you wrap it up in 5 minutes?
Yeah, I hope. But we should understand that both sides, Turkish and Armenians, have lost right now. The fact remains that the issue is matter of legitimate scholar debate with reputable historians on both sides, giving absolute priority to uncompromised Armenian and Turkish views. From this point of view, it should be noted that it is misleading to believe that there is a political, historical, and academic consensus on this issue.
But it's not important right now. I think it should be a humanistic consensus for the future. Because, let make it clear, and all in all, most of us know about the history, what happened. All in all, personally and at the same time as a young academic, academically I believe that Turks and Armenians should work to rebuild their historical friendship without forgetting difficult periods in their common past. It needs to be remembered what happened and what we should write a common future, not for you, not for me, not for generations, for our children, because the individual Turks and Armenians share a common Anatolian Ottoman heritage, and most expectedly, they share common culture and even language. Addition to that, in the venture to overcome historical and political weaknesses, all sides must be honest and open-minded, a process of true dialogue, learning to respect other sides' truth, gradually build up respect through familiarity and empathy may well be possible. And I think it is quite important could that not help Turkish and Armenian narratives come closer together and just around to create just a memory. Believing that it's possible, and it should be with dialogue and tolerances. For instance, Turkey proposed the establishment of a joint commission committed of Turkish and Armenian histories and other international experts to study events of 1915's tragedy. As you know, I'm not the I'm not the main owner of the floor and the chair at the same time. Cemal Uşak wrote an article 2 years ago about the Armenian question, and I want to cite something, just 2 paragraphs from his article, and I personally share the same ideas. Please try to remember the title of the article. The title of the article is that the well-being of the nation depends upon friendship and understanding with Armenians. Less than 2 years remained until 2015. The article written in 2013. The world is busily preparing to commemorate the pain that Armenians experienced in 1915 with a multitude conference and ceremonies. In this context, it is crucial to keep in mind that among those nations to recognize these events of 1915 as genocides, there are many countries that maintain critical political, economic and cultural ties with Turkey. Indeed, some of these nations are among Turkey's friends. Above all, we must not forget that the tragedy of 1915 has been the principal factor in the formation of Armenian identity over the past century. For this reason, to attempt to forge close relation between Turks and Armenians on the basis of forgetting past harm and looking toward the future, it is not only unrealistic, but from the Armenian perspective, it's quite major. Therefore, it is imperative that we put our perspective, collective memories of the past to one side in order to understand what really happened in a cold-headed subject manner. Undoubtedly, there will be many who express surprise and anger at the sentences and statement that forms the title of the essay. To be then, we should note that the author of these sentences is Cemal Uşak, is a figure, the author of these sentences is a figure who in recent years has been among the most controversial and important in Turkish society, Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, who is the probably well-known and important religious and at the same time philosophical person at the early 20th century. That means the Anatolia has a normative, peaceful and understandable rational background. to solve the Armenian question, we just need to work on it and create common, understandable memory, not for us, not for this saloon, for the future. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's really like walking in a minefield, talking about the Armenian issue, because you have to follow a scientific method, you have to have the academic integrity, but you have to respect the pain that was felt by the people. No social or political analysis no social or political analysis could undermine the pain felt by the people. We're trying to learn from our mistakes, right? Thank you.
It's really hard to express and to say something about that kind of tragedy. I always try to look your faces. If I saw a face quite angry or quite sad about this issue, I can't express myself because this is a tragedy, this is a humanistic issue. So it's not about just political interest. It's, from my point of view, it's about memory and it's about the human, I think, which is the most important thing in our world. Thank you very much again.
Now the mic is at Seref, who's going to talk about the burning issue. You see it on the screen. The Kurdish issue is basically a burning issue in Turkey. I'm not going to say much about it. Seref?
I'm really so happy to have you hear me, listen to me, and to although several of you guys have nothing to do with the Kurdish or Armenian issues by background, still you have the idea of peace in one part of the world bringing peace in the rest to the rest of the world. So that's a very noble point that you all are. And I have to make the note that this is based on my research that I did in 2008 to 2010 for my master's degree. And I also added some new things within the context of the current developments in the Middle East going on for the last few years. And my research was about the Turkey-fication process of the pro-Kurdish political parties. And I have to make the note that these pro-Kurdish political parties do not have the claim to represent all Kurds, because it's a huge community numbering around 15 to 25 million, estimations. Just a huge community, but these are the most organized and most effective pro-Kurdish political actors in Turkey. So what I mean by Turkification is, by the way, just a quick note, is the difference between integration versus forced assimilation. So Turkification is the idea of appealing to the entire nation, or to the entire society, better to say, society of Turkey. So the question of this research came from the very hot debates in Turkey accused against the pro-Kurdish parties, saying, well, they are not, or you're not appealing to the entire nation, but to a very small area, a region, and specifically confined to the question, to the Kurdish question, nothing else. So to what extent is that true? And if it's not true, what does it tell us about the future of the Kurdish question and hence the Turkish democracy, if not necessarily based on it? So could we go back to it? Just a bit. Yes. So to what extent has the pro-Kurdish party that I researched on, which the party lasted between 2005 and 2009, been a party for Turkey, Türkiye Partisi in Turkish? And to carry out this research, I had to examine almost all budgetary discussions in the Turkish parliament to see the participation of the pro-Kurdish MPs, the parliamentarians, and the themes that they were contributing in, or the demands they were seeking. So I think we can pass that theoretical section. We don't have that much time. So determines a party to be ethnic or non-ethnic. In other words, to be broadly based versus ethnic party. So there are basically two approaches. One saying the distribution of the support. If the distribution of support for a party is coming mainly, by majority, coming from a specific ethnic community, then it's an ethnic party. But the other approach says party's message to the voter determines whether a party or a political movement is ethnic or not. So I tried to present a new model called synthesis model. So, could we go back, please? The synthesis model says basically how the party expresses itself, how the party, what kind of messages or demands the party makes to appeal to the audience, to its grassroots, is not independent from the people he is being elected from. So it has to be looked at together. So I tried to see if this party is ethnic, first of all, if these parties, starting from early 1990s, with the process of the coalitions or the process of alliances between Turkish leftists and the Kurdish, pro-Kurdish politicians. So, the next one. So, the party's program, the debates in the Turkish parliament, and my interviews, qualitative in-depth interviews with the co-chairs of the Kurdish party, constituted the official side of the question. So I tried to see whether the Kurdish politicians and, the people, the personas, as well as the official platforms, the programs and the debates in the parliament show any ethnic inclination or a broadly integrated inclination. And the other part of the question was what the people voting for this movement, this party, think about it. So I interviewed the voters in Esenyurt district of Istanbul, as well as some of the local, I would say, local branches heads. So I'm going to summarize some of them. The major findings that I had, it was, of course, it had some sort of ethnic root to motivate, to get motivated politically, but it didn't comprise only of these ethnic demands. But I would say almost one-fourth, apart from one-fourth of the demands and the questions brought to the parliament, the majority, like the three-fourths of the demands and the questions and the debates and the party program and everything would go mostly along the line of, for instance, the question of poverty in western provinces of Turkey, the question of gender, women, and the question of ecofeminism and ecological society and inequality, socialist or egalitarian debate, and the question of universal human rights. So that's why alongside the ruling party, AKP, the Justice and Development Party, once was pro-EU, the Kurdish party probably was the only second pro-EU party at the time. The things have changed quite a lot though. So I saw that the party, the movement, located itself on 5 major branches, and ethnicity or localism was just one part of it. So the elite discourse. Interestingly, before I did this research, I was thinking, myself coming from a Kurdish background as well, always thinking that and that was a very popular discourse in the Turkish society that I heard, Turkish and Kurdish society. Well, the elites are very ethnicist, but the grassroots, the actual Kurdish people on the street would be very pro-Turkey and we are all brothers and sisters and Of course, they are not against a peace or anything. They are very pro-peace, the people on the street. But when it comes to the question of politics and the struggles of politics, the points that people cannot, reconcile on, they started to be really ethnically motivated. I mean, why I asked the lady of the age of 55, why did you vote for the party, for the Peace and Democracy Party, Democratic Society Party at the time? She said, well, basically because it's my party. What do you mean by it's your party? Well, it's the party of us Kurds. So what do you mean when you ask? Because when we migrated we had to forcibly migrate from our village and came to the city center, then people made us, the state and the people made us feel that we are Kurdish and we are different. So it's our party. So why should I vote for somebody else's party? It's for our national or for ethnic demands. So that was the very ethnicist or ethnically motivated demands from the grassroots. But interestingly, as opposed to what I expected and what most people expected in Turkey, I found out that the elite discourse in exclusively all the elites, MPs, co-chairs, including Ahmet Türk, Sabahat Tuncel, and Sırrı Sakık, and many others, and the local co-chairs of Istanbul district party co-chairs, they would go, well, we are the party for the whole Turkey, and it is a horrible accusation on us, because it's not us who is not the party for Turkey, but it's those who underestimated the problems of Kurds for 100 years, and they are not the party for Turkey, but we are the real party for Turkey, and it's our project. I was really shocked. They said we have the project of Turkey-fication as opposed to Turkey-fication. Instead of assimilation, we want integration as Kurds. So we want official recognition of our language, education in mother tongue in Kurdish, as well as in Circassian, in Laz, or in Armenian and in Greek. They have in Armenian and Greek, but that was just in other languages that haven't been recognized by the state yet. So that was quite interesting finding for me. So what made these differences come together peacefully, because people are still voting, and it gets at least 5 to 6, 7% of the Turkish nationwide vote in Turkey. And how come they get the vote? Because they are still using, like popularly sometimes, using the Kurdish sensitivities, the elites, to fill in the gap with their grassroots. For instance, they show prominent Turkish figures in elections, just to show that, okay, we are together. You defend my rights, and I'm going to be with you. So that's a new kind of coexistence in Turkey that we've seen probably in the last 15 to 20 years, 15 years. But the bloody bloody military conflict started in 1980s. So it is and in this Turkey-fication process in the last 15 or 20 years in Turkey is an interesting transition or denouncement of the separatism or the secessionism, I would say, from that to integration. But it's a voluntary integration. And some other sections of the Kurdish community, some other political actors, like the Turkish KDP, which is a counterpart of the Iraqi Kurdish regime, or some others like Hakpar, which is a more socialist sort of motivated Kurdish party. They are more pro-federation, or even some of them very pro-independence. But the biggest one among these actors is the pro-Turkification Kurdish movement, the mainstream one. So it's an interesting transition from the early fight for secession in 1980s to, yes, we're going to be together, but we want further rights and democratization and recognition. But it's not just that, there are other demands. Sure. I just didn't want to disturb you guys. Thank you very much. But it's not that ping, butterflies going, it's not that easy, because we can summarize the demands in 2 branches. The first branch is the human rights individualistic demands. And they're from the individualistic perspective are the ones to easily conduct in countries, in societies where democracy has been implemented quite well. So among them we can count linguistic rights, education in mother tongue in public schools, which we only agreed on having in private schools so far, but it doesn't seem to be adequate for Kurds, and mother tongue to be recognized constitutionally, and the change of naming of Kurdish towns and Armenian towns and maybe some old Greek towns to its old names, to an acceptable degree, of course, not going like 2,000 years back, but at least those names people are still using, including my village name is Korveng, but the name officially is Köprülü, but no one calls it Köprülü at all. So I think there is a big consensus in the Turkish society, in majority, even in the most corrupt government today. There is a sort of agreement on those individualistic perspective-based, like human rights demands, but when it comes to put them into practice, the actors, especially the political elites, start to set back, and it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened mostly so far. And the use of Kurdish language in public spaces, in government offices, like bilingualism, official bilingualism that we have in Wales, just like that, or in elsewhere in Spain or in many other parts of the world. So the second part is a bit hard to handle for the experience of democracy in the Turkish context, because maybe I would ask. Joking. So the second part is the collectivistic perspective, and they have something to do, absolutely something to do with human rights perspective, but they are mostly political demands. So they're mostly group rights or collective rights terminology, I would say. So the recognition of collective identity, group rights, status. So, but this part is not really, not only by the Turkish people, but also among the Kurds, is not totally agreed on. Because when it comes to the conduct of politics, there occurs different social classes among Kurds themselves, different political actors among Kurds themselves, and fighting each other. I mean, politically struggling each other. So, but the question of a general amnesty for the prisoners of the militia group, the PKK, which is officially recognized as a terrorist organization by the US and the European Union, hence in Turkey, and so the return of the diaspora people and the extended amnesty, general amnesty for the prisoners. And the local autonomy, that's probably the highest of the demands, and it is a sort of local autonomy or sort of European Union's framework agreement on local governments. And extended decentralization is the basic things. But the degree of asking for decentralization differs from one actor to another actor. While the pro-PKK, pro-Kurdish political actors asking for autonomy, what they call democratic autonomy, but several other actors are asking for just a constitutional recognition. It's fine. We're not looking for an autonomous region or federation because we live in Istanbul. At least 3 million Kurds live in Istanbul, by the way. Or some others, on the other hand, are even more radical, saying, well, we want some independence or federation, but that's a very marginal part of the Kurdish society. It's not very common. And the sociology of Turkey shows that it's going to be something between constitutional recognition to autonomy. It's not going to be separation or anything, because the sociology of Turkish Kurdistan is completely different from the Iraqi and Iranian and other cases. I think the one before that was missed. Yeah. So, prospectively, I think we can't underestimate the recent things going on in the Middle East, the so-called Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening. And it's not essentially Arab. It could be anything. It could be Kurdish, it could be Turkish, it could be anything. So it's not necessarily about, cutting the head of a dictator like Mubarak or Assad or anything. It's not that. So it's more than that. It can occur very harshly in very harsh societies where there's no sign of democracy, like, I don't know, Tunisia or Egypt or, Assad regime. But when it comes to relatively, I would say, relatively democratic countries like Turkey, it still has some impact. So when we're talking about the Kurdish question now in 21st century, we should think about trans-border and transnational approaches, and the political actors, Turkish or Kurdish political actors, whoever are interested in solving the question in a sustainable way and bringing a sustainable peace and togetherness, should think about it in a transnational, trans-border perspective. It does not necessarily mean that, come on, let's bring the Turkish Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds and Syrian Kurds together. Even the Kurds themselves, at least in the mid-range, would have problems with that. They wouldn't accept it because of the classes and different opinions and actors. But the thing is, the cultural, economic and other interactions, just like what we have in the European Union and Schengen area and other places and economic trade, free trade areas, should deepen and deepen, and no one can beat globalization that easily. So, transport multiculturalism, looking at the Kurdish question or the Kurdistans in the four parts of, four countries, should be thought within the context of multiculturalism as well, because the Kurdish parts in all four countries, the four Kurdistans, are not just, all Kurdish, just like any other part of the world. There are Assyrian, Syriani minorities or Armenian minorities, absolutely, and who would like to return? The Assyrians, I think, are very tough in that, and they really want to come back. Maybe the Armenian has been a bit of a history now, 100 years, unfortunately, and we only have like 60,000 Armenians in Turkey, unfortunately, now, but still there would be new openings and new people would like to come in, and they would ask for some space in those newly recognized Kurdish areas, or at least extended democracies and expanded democracies. So the Kurds themselves, I think, in any case, will have another trial or another exam. They're going to be tested of democracy, just like the Turks have been, and any other, like the Germans or Austrians, all have been. So when we're talking about the ethnic question, we no longer are talking about one or two groups. We're talking about a regional or even a global question, as you guys, who are probably not Kurdish or Armenian, are still interested in talking about that. Thank you very much.
Now it's time for the Q&A session. If you have any questions for any of us here, please shoot them. It's not limited to questions, by the way. You can share your contribution, your criticism, suggestions, or whatever pops up on your mind. Do you mind if I exploit my position as the moderator today and I address the first question to Erdi? Armenian issue is an issue on which a lot of people are pessimistic, because the both sides of the debate, the Turks and Armenians, and the Armenians of Armenia and the Armenians of diaspora, they have a lot of disagreements. So there are a lot of pessimistic attitudes. Are you optimistic by any means on the solution, on the possibility of a solution?
There is no doubt about that. I'm optimistic about that issue, indeed. Because, as I mentioned in my speech, this issue, this question, based on great many fields, area, but it's possible to summarize that historically and politically. Generally, people try to explain that question, that issue. One is historically and the other one is politically. And from my point of view, and as we can know in the previous times, historically now it seems quite impossible to clarify that issue based on the documents, because during the wartime, during the early areas, it's really hard to find all the documents clearly. And secondly, politically, that case, that issue occurs the nationalization periods, which is beginning of 20th century. But now, as you mentioned your speech, we are in a period we try to discuss about the postmodernism, which is called melting time. We now showing that all the hard things start melting. That kind of nationalism, to think about that quote-unquote archaic nationalism, it's quite impossible. And as logically and rationally, there is no beneficial point to feed that struggle, because now, in any case, we don't have a Twitter, but in all the world, use the technology tools. That means they share, they know about each other, they partly communicate, to compare. It's an amazing thing in previous times. And they know their Armenian friends, we know, and they know us. That means, and we can see that we are no differences, and we have same aims about the world. So that I'm quite pessimistic. I'm definitely not optimistic, but I have some reasons about that. Clear dialogue, understand each other, and create understandable rationalistic memory, and then build a new time on that memory. Yes or no? Thank you.
Yes, we're looking at like 1,000 years of togetherness in terms of Turks, Kurds, and Armenians, basically. And it's really not easy to say a Kurd from a Turk or from an Armenian. We look alike very much in terms of the physical appearance, and we cook similar things in our kitchens. We sing similar songs, basically. With
similar songs, well, exactly the same songs most of the time in the Turkish, Armenian, and Kurdish case, with different lyrics.
Yes.
Multiculturalism, so I'm saying.
Oh yeah, with different lyrics. So 1,000 years of togetherness, it's not really, there are binding forces that bring us together, as well as those radical secessionist or ethnically oriented attitudes, basically. So, the questions may come in German, by the way. Yasemin is going to translate if necessary. Sir?
I would like to combine what has been said by the three speakers. The model of the modern Turkish state is one of a nation state in the strictest possible sense. And I do remember, I discussed that last year at Abant. If there is any hope to resolve the issue with the Armenians and with the Kurds, I think it would be a wise step on the part of the authorities of the Turkish Republic to reconsider that state paradigm. And why should it not be possible to make a clear conceptual distinction between nationality or nationhood and citizenship? And why should it not be possible for someone to say, I'm Kurd, I belong to the Kurdish nationality, and I'm a citizen of the Republic of Turkey. The Republic is, in religious terms, it's neither Muslim nor Christian or whatever, and the Republic is neither Turkic nor Armenian or Kurdish. It is a state structure, and the Republic is based on certain laws that define this state. And the big problem so far, and I think it has not yet been overcome, I don't know what has happened after the debates at Abant, the big problem to me seems that the establishment is not yet prepared to make that distinction and to get away from the paradigm, from the very narrow paradigm of a nation state. But in the era of multiculturalism, I think that would be a natural thing. And I just have two quick and brief questions concerning the specific issues. As far as Armenia is concerned, certainly it would be very good to have a joint commission of historians. I would think the chairman should be from a neutral country. Both Turkey and Armenia should appoint an equal number of experts, and someone from Switzerland or wherever should moderate. I know Armenia is not prepared for this, but as far as coming to terms with the historical truth is concerned, I do remember we had a debate at Bilgi University a few days after this terrible assassination of Hrant Dink. But in order to come to terms with history, I think Turkey has a certain duty still to fulfill. And I just wonder what the situation is concerning the most famous and most brilliant piece of literature that exists on the Armenian tragedy, and I mean a book written by an Austrian Jewish gentleman, Franz Werfel, Die 40 Tage des Musa-Dag, the 40 days of the Musa-Dag. This is one of the greatest pieces of world literature, and as to my knowledge, I think it is virtually unknown in Turkey. It has been translated in all major world languages, and I can tell you, I read it, it's around 1,000 pages. It is not anti-Turkish, it is a very good piece of literature, and it gives a very comprehensive insight, and it has made me aware, for instance, of the compassion of so many Turkish people, 115 people who sided with the Armenians who were expelled from their villages. Very important stories, and I think this should not be kept away from the Turkish readers, and there should be a Turkish version. And concerning the Kurdish issue, just one particular question. Why, you did not mention it, I think, specifically. Would it not now be the time to reconsider the official and legal position of the Republic of Turkey vis-à-vis the PKK? Because one could look at the history of Palestine. I do remember well, I'm old enough, I do remember well the time when everyone here also in this country considered the Palestine Liberation Organization a terrorist organization, and Mr. Yasser Arafat the top terrorist leader of the world. Later, the United States of America decided to negotiate with them, and the State of Israel decided to negotiate. It was very traumatic, and we know Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a radical because of his preparedness to negotiate. And I think this time will also have to come, whether you like it or whether the Turkish establishment likes it or not. This time will have to come, because you cannot choose the leaders and you cannot choose the groups on behalf of the Kurds. And I understand you are yourself of Kurdish origin, and you do not, the good thing is that you do not hide it, so to speak. That's no, but I know some people in Turkey felt that they have to keep it. Yeah. Okay.
Many of our problems stem from the old paradigm of the state. Actually, in 1920s and 30s, it would be more understandable to have some kind of authoritarianism that we didn't really have democracies that developed right back in the time. And we had a lot of authoritarian leaders in, for example, continental Europe, even back in the time. The problem is we had defined the ideal citizen. Turkish Republic wanted to create its ideal citizen, which would be ethnically Turkish, religiously Muslim, and religiously again a Sunni Muslim. So ethnically Turkish excluded the Kurds and the other groups basically. And religiously Muslim excluded non-Muslims from walking to the cores of politics and culture basically. And then again, there was even a bigger exclusion that Muslimness was defined on a very secular basis in Turkey. So conservative groups were then excluded. So this added to already existing skepticism vis-a-vis different groups in Turkey. So, questions? Any other? Sir?
Shall we respond? Could I take your name again, please? Your name, please? Hans. I absolutely, 100% agree with you in the point that you made about the dialogue to be built with the militia. Because one day they're called terrorist organization by the states and by the international organizations, and you know, just like in the case of Palestinian Liberation Organization plus African National, you know, all the movements of such kind based on a certain defensive ideology, based on injustices of ethnic background or any other background, are seen in a really problematic way. But then, if you want to really solve the question, you have to have some sort of dialogue. But the thing is, not in the principal idea of dialogue with them. The thing is, I mean, with the parties, the thing is about the aftermath of this dialogue. Because in the Turkish Kurdistan, even more so compared to other parts of Kurdish areas in the Middle East, the actors are very complicated. And other actors of Kurdish politics have big problems with the pro-PKK movement. The thing is, as I've said, the multicultural model is a good one, that the domination of certain posts should not be done by any group, but it should be based on free and open vote and the will of the people. And in my view, no single group should be excluded from this new opening, because this democratic transformation is needed to have a safe and sound democracy, not for an authoritarianism. Because the nation-building processes in almost all, exclusively all cases, have created certain others. And it created certain new authoritarianism, and the justification for this new authoritarianism have usually been nation-building. So you can do anything, and we ignore because you're building the nation. So you can suppress others, the minorities, not necessarily ethnic, but also political minorities. So that's a big question. And your point was really important. You can't choose the leaders of the people on their behalf. I agree, absolutely.
Just another quick note, and I'll
Just a second. Thank you very much. I'm quite agree with your ideas. And basically in 2014, it's really hard to describe yourself just in some example cases. I'm definitely pure Turk. For example, my surname is Öztürk, which is mean pure or real Turk. But I don't know. General Turkish, I don't care. I feel myself human and citizen of Republic of Turkey. But it's quite hard to establish this idea, all of the Turkey. That means we need a new constitution, because we have a constitution which is a frame, not a frame one, it's a surrounded one. And the constitution of Turkey right now, you can find how the people do properly their free time. It's not a constitution. It's like an order book. And new constitution may be a fine. And thirdly, you are right about the history writing and the reading period. One of the biggest historians in Turkey, İlber Ortaylı, many times says that. And not right now, but previously, Turkish people don't like to write and read the history. So we should write and share with Armenians. And I think, yeah, that's enough. I think you're definitely right. I agree with you, right, all the points.
So let's just keep it short in this session, if you don't mind.
Mr. Öztürk, I have the impression, and it is obvious, that you haven't had enough time to prepare yourself for this speech or for this lecture, okay? I don't want to be unpolite, but you should research or learn more about the Armenian question, about the reason, what it is, because obviously only few people here knows what is the Armenian question itself. And then why happened all those things? Only to say the pains we understand, it is not enough. Okay? I don't want to give a speech here or a lecture, but if somebody has the interest, I am ready to give a lecture or a speech So we can move forward if we understand first what it is. Just talking about the historical cohesion, etc. Yeah, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And we see and we hear always the same version, almost, I underline, almost the same version of the Turkish republics, of the government, always the same one. And it is enough. It is enough. We should learn the reasons and understand and give also the name of the genocide and not say your pains or whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and nice to meet you. First of all, it's not a lecture, it's a kind sharing discussion. And your short speech is, I think, really important, and you told a good couple of words. Move forward. Yes, my generation wants to move forward. Let's teach me. The next time you should give it, and I should ask a question, and we move forward. I don't want to stand that position, and I know you don't want to stand that position. Let's move together. My hand is here, and just give me your hand. It's not important, genocide and whatever the people said. I don't care about it. I just want to live together, and I just want to open my border, but not an official border, I mean. I want a hug. It's a humanistic. Yeah, it's tragedy or whatever. It's impossible sometimes to understand that. But please teach me. Yeah, that's what I want to say that. I don't...
The Turkish version of Musada, 40 Days of Musada, yeah, is published also in Turkish. So you can read it. And you have enough books of Mr. Taner Akçam in Turkish and also in English. There are so many literature, and if you haven't time or the occasion to learn and to read that, please do that in the near future.
I'll do that. Believe me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the contribution. Further questions?
Zunächst einen herzlichen Dank an alle Referenten. Es war sehr bereichernd. Meine Frage geht an Herrn Kavak. Es gibt eine Diversität unter den Kurden und nicht alle sind in dem Mainstream, den Sie uns bereits geschildert haben. Und wie sehen Sie die Kurden in der Diaspora? Sprich, teilen Sie diese auch vorwiegend dasselbe Gedankengut, den Sie geschildert haben? Danke.
A very big question. 3 minutes. I should be a genius. My dear friend, if I'm not wrong, from the translation you're asking if the process of Turkification within the one actor of Turkish Kurdish politics, political actor, is it the same in diaspora? Are you asking that one? Yep. Okay. So I think in the diaspora, which is my field research for my PhD, ongoing PhD thesis, the diasporan Kurds are even more diverse than the local, homeland Kurds. Because in the diaspora, the interactions with the outer world, and not just the Kurds from other 3 parts of Kurdistan, but also with the Armenians, with the Greeks, with Germans or English or Austrians, is so vast and so strong. So I can't say there is one sort of fixed approach to Turkification, but I'm working on the British Kurds, Kurdish diaspora in the UK. So my impression in the UK is very pro-Turkification, not Turkification, but Turkification. And the interactions of Turkish Kurds in the UK are mostly with Turkish socialists and Democrats and liberals, rather than fellow Kurds from conservative background. It's a very interesting case. And the question of Alevi minority comes into stage in the British case, interestingly. The 60% would be of heterodoxy group. So the thing is, it's not one single dominant thing, but it's the strongest thing, I would say. Yeah, it is sort of dominant now, but for instance, in Swedish case, as far as I know, the Kurdish diaspora politics is very pro-federation, and in some instances very pro-independence. But in the in the British case, it's pretty much similar to the homeland politics. So it's very diverse, it's not one type. Thanks.
Thank you. One last question we can take, and we'll be finishing with that. The discussion session, I mean. Sir?
I'd like to refer on the Sancak Alexandret, including... I'd like to refer on the Sancak Alexandret, what has happened there. Was quite a lot of different minorities, Arabs, from Kafkas people. Are there other minorities in Turkey today which are worthwhile discussing about? Are there other minorities in Turkey it's worthwhile to discuss about these? And are the Alevites also considered as minority, or is it just in the religious sphere the difference to be seen?
Yeah, obviously there are big minority groups in Turkey, and the Alevis would be the biggest then among these different groups. But it's a religious minority. I would say an interpretation of Islam. And their demands, they have their own demands towards recognition or towards recognition of their religious places, Cemevis, and very legitimate ones. The other thing is it's not just the Kurdish ethnicity that are asking for more rights. We have got huge population of Bosniaks, more than probably the Bosnian population, Bosniak population in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There lives more Bosnians in Turkey, as well more Albanians in Turkey than Albanians in Albania. Quite funny case, but it's the post-empire situation. The thing is, the very specificity of the Kurdish case is the only autochthonous people in the Anatolia among those post-migration communities is the Kurdish case, and the trans-border links, we can't underestimate it, with the other Kurds in Syria, Iraq and Iran, who gradually gain either autonomy, federation or independence. So the Kurdish question is not just a human rights question, but a very big political question, and if you don't take the real measures, it's going to be a big catastrophe. That's why we can't say, okay, we have Laz, Cherkez, and Bosniaks and Kurds, like a Chechnya, we say, like a salad, and we put different things, and it's not that. The Kurdish question is a very big one, and we should recognize them constitutionally, linguistic rights and everything, but the Kurdish question is also, it requires political rights and I think a group recognition, personal view. Otherwise, impossible. Because the happenings is not like let's say the Bosnians in Turkey. They're like almost 40,000 people died in the last 2-3 decades, just for the cause.
Just one very quick addition to that. The whole perspective of analyzing the issue in terms of majority and minority, there's a significant hierarchy in this. So why don't we move on with diversity instead of defining who constitute majority or who is really minority as an attitude. I think very quick, the last question, very quick, please.
Just 60 seconds, please. I'm coming from Sarajevo, and I know what war is. I lived in Sarajevo for 3 years, and I know the city was totally renovated, but the people's psychology was not, after 3 years of experience. Back to Turkey's Turkish-Armenian question. I know both sides' stories. I know Musadak, the story about Musadak, but I also know the book of McCarthy or the book of Levy, and this issue is totally controversial. It is still going on. It is still being debated. I'm sorry to say that. At the moment, no side can convince the other side. Armenians cannot convince Turks, and Turks cannot convince Armenians. So what do diplomats do in such case? They say, please, sides, come together, discuss. Whatever you know, discuss. If it is not diplomats issue, let historians come together, let them discuss and find a common way. I mean, this is the future that we can create for our own children. Discussing, we are at the age of internet. So why not just going through the stories of hatred? Let's eradicate those stories and let's create a common future for our children. Let's create empathy towards each other. That's the only future, and I totally agree with Mr. Öztürk, what he was saying. And I'm very supportive of Turkey's approach of bringing historians together. Thank you.
What I would add to that, your point is, well, this is very critical and we can't take states out of the equation. And the questions of genocide or ethnic cleansing or whatever, they're all the same horrible thing. I don't want to name that, but they're horrible. But the thing is, when we have the asymmetry of power between the atrocities, and we can never do that race, you know, who is speedier or stuff. But when it's the Armenian case, unfortunately, you have to see that. In my personal, humble view, it's an asymmetry of power. And it's just one of the subjects of the empire, whereas it's the state. And we can't say that we people, I mean, us people, including the Kurdish people, we can't deny our role in the massacre and forced migration of the Armenians. The thing is, that was what makes it worse than other cases, like the Armenian massacres towards the Muslim villages. That happened as well, probably to my village as well, I don't know. But the thing is, the asymmetry is state power. That makes it a bit different, and that requires more empathy towards the Armenians, in my personal view.
Thank you. But I'm not a supporter of the Turkish or Armenian side, but it seems to be that the discussion and sit together, diplomats, scholars and politicians, is quite old school. Let's sit the public together, sit the civil society together, discuss, teach, learn. For example, my plan after that speech, if the story is fine, you should give me the name of the books, and I want to take his email address, and we start a talk. We will create that, not the politicians, not the politics. 3 cents is enough.
Okay. And one last sentence from me.
I would like to say one sentence more.
Okay, but I will always say the last sentence.
As I told you, always the same story. And the 2 names he has given to the gentleman, and many others, they are in the payroll of the Turkish American societies or associations.
Okay.
We know a lot of stories. They have also their certification.
Heavy allegations you're having now.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I am really tired to hear always the same story.
Okay, but we must always agree to disagree, right? Thank you very much. We exploited your patience tonight. And here comes probably the best part of the night. Please bring some peace. Thank you.